Welcome back to our deep dive. You've sent over some really compelling stuff this time. Definitely a real head scratcher. We're looking into this really strange story that started way back in 1989 down in Ellerslie, Georgia.
That's right.
And it's all centered around this little girl, Heidi Wyrick. She was 8 years old. And she started, well, seeing things. Spirits, apparently, right after her family moved house.
Exactly. And the materials you gave us look at it from like two angles. There's the original Unsolved Mysteries segment, which kind of lays out the basic story.
Right, the classic telling.
Yeah, and then there's this amazing long comment thread online, people just discussing it, debating, sharing their own theories, even personal stories connected to it. It's quite a resource.
Okay, so let's get into it. Our goal here, our mission, I guess, is to sift through all this, the original story, the reactions, and pull out the really striking parts of Heidi's experiences.
Yeah, we want to figure out what these sources together really tell us about this whole very perplexing case.
Without getting totally bogged down in every single tiny detail, we're looking for those key moments, the things that make you go, hang on, that's significant.
Precisely. Just trying to give you a clear, engaging picture of what happened and how people have sort of grappled with it since, based only on what you sent us.
Okay, so setting the scene. The Unsolved Mysteries piece says pretty soon after the move, this is February '89, Heidi has her first encounter right at the front door. What did she say she saw?
Well, she described seeing a man. She called him Con.
Non-con. Okay.
And the details she gave, especially for an 8-year-old, were, well, quite vivid. White hair, she said, wearing a T-shirt that was covered in blood.
Wow.
And he had a bandage on his hand, also bloody. It's a really unsettling image for a kid to come up with.
Yeah, no kidding. Very specific.
That kind of specific detail right at the start is something to maybe keep in mind.
And you can picture the mom, Lisa Wyrick. Her first reaction wasn't exactly, oh, it must be a ghost, was it? More like, uh-oh, panic mode.
Exactly right. Lisa immediately thought, intruder, someone dangerous, maybe. Her mom instincts just kicked in. She pulled Heidi inside, locked the doors.
Makes sense.
And even grabbed a butcher knife, just ready to protect her daughter. Then she called her husband, Andy, told him to come home right away.
Right. And Andy gets home, and they do the logical thing, yeah? Try to find this person.
Yep. The article says Andy and Lisa searched the whole neighborhood looking for anyone who matched Heidi's description of Con. Found nothing. No one looked anything like that. So that lack of a simple explanation, that's sort of where things start getting stranger.
Okay, so then, not long after Con, Heidi sees another figure. This time, a man she calls Mr. Gordy.
That's right, Mr. Gordy.
And the mom, Lisa, was a bit confused at first, thinking maybe they were the same guy, like Con Gordy.
Yeah, that's what the article suggests. Lisa initially thought maybe it was one person, Con Gordy, so she started asking around the neighborhood, anyone heard of a Con Gordy? Trying to make sense of it.
Which is totally understandable, trying to piece it together.
Yeah, exactly. The human brain trying to fit weird information into a familiar box.
And this is where it gets really wild, connecting to the house right next door. This is where it starts to feel less like, I don't know, a kid's imagination and more something else.
You got it. Lisa just happened to mention these names, Con and Mr. Gordy, to her sister. Now, her sister had just bought the house right next door to the Wyricks.
Oh.
And it turns out a man named James S. Gordy, he was the previous owner of the sister's house. That proximity is key.
Wow. Okay, so finding that out, Lisa's reaction must have been pretty intense. Like, maybe this isn't just Heidi making things up.
Totally. The article says Lisa was terrified when she saw the name James S. Gordy on the deed. She knew the previous owners had been there a long time ago.
Right.
So the penny dropped. This Mr. Gordy Heidi was seeing, he must be dead. That was a huge turning point for her.
Okay, but wait, there's more, right? Lisa then talks to someone whose family owned the sister's house before the sister bought it. Catherine Ledford.
Yes, Catherine Ledford. And she confirmed some really important things. First, James Gordy had passed away back in 1974.
Okay, confirmation.
And second, her description of him matched what Heidi had been saying. Gray hair, always wore a suit and tie, shiny black shoes. Catherine also mentioned he was the Sunday school superintendent at their church for years. Painted a picture of this respectable older gentleman.
So these details are starting to line up in a pretty uncanny way.
They really are. It adds significant weight to what Heidi was claiming.
So now we've got Mr. Gordy potentially identified, but what about Con? The guy with the bloody hand, that's still hanging out there. How did that piece fall into place?
This is maybe the most striking part. Catherine Ledford, she brought over some old family photos for them to look at.
Right.
Heidi's looking through them, doesn't really recognize anyone until, the article says, she points to this little bitty picture right at the bottom of one page.
A tiny picture.
You know who's in it?
Let me guess. Con.
Exactly. The man Heidi first called Con, and Catherine identifies him as her uncle Lon Bachelor. People apparently called him Con sometimes.
Lon. Okay, so not actually Con.
Right, Lon. And Catherine explains that Lon died in 1957 from cancer. But here's the kicker. As a young man, Lon lost his hand in a cotton gin accident.
Oh my gosh, the bandage.
Precisely. It perfectly explained Heidi's initial, very specific description of the bloody bandage and the injured hand. The level of detail is just wow.
I mean, for Lisa, the mom, seeing that,
Yeah.
connecting those dots, she must have gone from skeptic to believer pretty fast.
The article really implies this was the moment, Heidi describing two specific dead people connected to the house next door, including Lon's missing hand and the bandage. Something an 8-year-old just wouldn't know.
No way.
Lisa was convinced then. She reportedly said finding out his name was Lon, not Con, scared me to death because I knew Heidi was really saying something. It shows how those checkable facts can just flip your whole perspective.
Okay, so for about 4 years after that, things are maybe not normal, but consistent. Heidi sees Mr. Gordy, she sees Lon Bachelor, and they seem, okay, benign.
That seems to be the case, yeah. For about 4 years, she continued to interact with these two spirits, apparently without fear. But then, 1993 rolls around, Lisa gets pregnant. And things change. They take a much darker turn.
Ah, okay. This is where the narrative really shifts, isn't it?
It does. The article says that around the time Lisa got pregnant, a new figure appeared. A dark figure. And this one terrified Heidi.
So a totally different vibe from Gordy and Lon.
Completely different. She'd never been scared of them. This new presence was malevolent, frightening. It adds this whole other layer. Not all the encounters were friendly.
And this dark figure, it wasn't just a one-off thing. It stuck around. Became violent.
According to Lisa, yes, it became a regular presence in the house. And sometimes felt violent, brought a sense of dread. It really, as you said, upped the ante.
Understandably, they thought about moving, right? I mean, who wouldn't?
They definitely considered it. It's the natural response, get away from whatever this is. But then they had this realization.
What was that?
That Heidi's ability, or whatever it was, probably wasn't tied to the house itself. Lisa felt that wherever they moved, Heidi would likely still have this. Well, she called it a gift. Of seeing people who'd passed on.
So moving might not actually solve anything.
Right. It showed they were starting to accept this as part of Heidi's reality, even if it was scary.
And then things got even worse, physically worse, after Heidi's little sister Jordan was born in '94. This is where it gets really disturbing.
Tragically, yes. It escalates from just seeing things to actual physical harm.
The article mentions deep gashes on Heidi's face, just showing up.
Yeah, just 2 weeks after Jordan was born, Lisa finds these deep scratches on Heidi's face. Imagine finding that on your child. Terrifying.
And the dad, Andy, his first reaction was, maybe she did it herself, like in her sleep.
Initially, yeah. Andy kind of brushed it off, thought maybe she just scratched herself accidentally. Again, looking for that normal explanation first, it's understandable.
But then he experienced something similar, something that made him think twice.
Oh, yeah. Big time. Just 2 nights after Lisa saw the scratches on Heidi, Andy wakes up in agony. He finds 3 distinct claw marks raked down his side.
3 marks.
3 marks. And it happened again the next night. 3 marks on his back. And the night after that, 3 marks on his chest.
Whoa. Consecutive nights, same thing.
Exactly. These repeated, very specific injuries happening to him, that makes it much, much harder to dismiss as just coincidence or self-inflicted. Really ramps up the fear factor.
Okay, so with things getting physical and frankly terrifying, the Wyricks decide they need outside help. They contact a parapsychologist, Dr. William Roll.
Right, someone who studies this kind of phenomena.
What was it about this case that got Dr. Roll interested?
Well, according to the article, it was specifically because Heidi wasn't just saying vague things. She was giving detailed physical descriptions and, importantly, names.
Right, Gordy and Lon.
Names that she apparently could not have obtained in any ordinary way. That's what caught his attention. It suggested something potentially real beyond just, a kid's imagination or suggestion. Those verifiable details were crucial.
And Dr. Roll didn't just take their word for it, right? He did some actual investigation, used photos.
Correct. They had managed to find some photos of Mr. Gordy by then. So Dr. Roll set up a photo lineup, Mr. Gordy's picture, mixed in with several others. Standard procedure, really, to test recognition.
You got police lineup, basically.
Wait.
Can she pick him out?
Pretty much. Could she identify the man she claimed to be seeing?
And she did.
She did. The article emphasizes this for the second time. Heidi correctly identified one of the spirits she'd described from a photo. First lawn bachelor, now James Gordy.
Wow. That must have really solidified things for Dr. Roll.
Absolutely. It significantly boosted his conviction that Heidi's experiences were genuine, which led him to the big question, the one that still hangs over this case. Why are these things happening to this little girl? What's the underlying reason? That remains the mystery.
And the Unsolved Mysteries show kind of leaves it there.
Yeah.
Posing that question to the audience.
Yeah.
What does the article say about Heidi later on as an adult?
Yeah, and mentioned she's grown up now, doesn't live in that house anymore. Interestingly, she says she hasn't seen Mr. Gordy in years.
Oh, really? So he stopped appearing?
Apparently. But she does still see the dark figure and other spirits too, quite frequently.
Still, after all this time.
Yep. But the article suggests that it's become so normal for her now that she just kind of takes it in stride. Even the dark figure doesn't seem to scare her like it used to. It's like she's adapted to this extraordinary reality.
Huh. Adaptation. Interesting way to put it. So the segment ends basically asking, was it all coincidence? Lucky guesses. Or did this little girl really have a connection to the dead? Leaves it hanging.
Exactly. Open-ended.
Okay, let's switch over to those comments you mentioned, because that thread really opens up a whole new dimension, how people reacted, what they thought was going on. What kind of stuff jumped out at you there?
Oh, it's a wild mix. You see everything. Like, someone suggested reading the Islamic Holy Quran to get rid of the spirits. Shows how people filter these things through their own beliefs, you know?
Right, applying their own framework.
Then you have the more skeptical takes, even bordering on accusatory. Like one person who wondered if maybe the father was somehow the dark figure.
Oof, that's dark.
Yeah. But then on the flip side, tons of people strongly believed Heidi. Really felt she had a genuine gift.
A lot of believers in the comments then.
Definitely. One commenter even had this theory that the reason she isn't like a famous medium today is because she's Christian, implying some kind of bias against Christian psychics or something.
Huh. Interesting social commentary almost.
Yeah, it raises questions about how culture shapes our view of these things.
The comments also got into something kind of sad and confusing. What happened to the dad, Andy? People seemed curious, but the info was all over the place.
Yeah, that was strange. Several people asked about him dying, since he would have been relatively young. And then you get these two completely different stories.
Like what?
One person posts this really specific, graphic account, says he died in a psychiatric hospital after smoking a meth-laced cigarette given by another patient, even names the patient. Really detailed.
Wow, that's very specific. And grim.
Super grim. But then someone...
Good reminder to take online comments with a huge grain of salt. Okay, back to the paranormal stuff in the comments. Someone shared a really long personal story about knocking and scratching. Sounded eerily similar to the Wyricks experience.
Yes, that one stood out. This person talked about a family belief that hearing 3 knocks means something bad. Spiritually, the great deceiver, they called it.
3 knocks, okay?
And then they described their own experience with constant knocking and scratching sounds in their house, which they believed only stopped when they used a rosary.
A religious object stopping it.
Right. The parallels to the Wyricks, especially the scratches, and the idea of a specific number of knocks being significant are definitely noticeable. It taps into similar fears and interpretations.
And the number 3. That popped up again in another comment, didn't it? Related to scratches.
It did. Another person shared a story from their childhood weird stuff happening after using an Ouija board at a slumber party. This was actually in a house they later lived in as an adult.
Okay. Ouija board. Classic trigger in these stories.
Right. And they specifically mentioned believing a malevolent spirit was tied to the number 3, 3 knocks again, lights flickering 3 times. And crucially, their nephew later experienced 3 scratches. Just like Andy Wyrick.
3 scratches again. Wow. It's like this recurring motif across different accounts.
It really is. These independent stories, even if anecdotal, add to that sense of a pattern, or at least a shared cultural trope about these kinds of hauntings.
Yeah, whether they're objectively true or not, these shared stories definitely add to the overall creepiness of the Wyrick case. People clearly relate to it. And they interpret the spirits differently, too, based on their beliefs.
For sure. One commenter saw the scratches as clearly a demonic attack, and they wondered if Mr. Gordy and Lon were such good Christian men, why weren't they, resting in peace in heaven?
Right. Applying a specific religious framework, good goes to heaven, bad or demonic stays here.
Exactly, that binary view.
But not everyone saw Mr. Gordy that way, right? Some comments had a different take on him.
No, definitely not. Another person suggested maybe Mr. Gordy was actually trying to be protective. Like maybe he was a good spirit trying to help the family, maybe even warning them about the dark figure that showed up later.
So more ambiguity there.
Yeah.
Not necessarily good or bad, maybe just present and trying to communicate.
Possibly. It highlights how the same events can be interpreted in completely different ways depending on your starting assumptions.
And then you get the really out there theories too, just people trying to connect dots in unexpected ways.
Oh, absolutely. Like the commenter who speculated Mr. Gordy might be related to President Jimmy Carter.
Okay, where did that come from?
Who knows? But it just shows people trying to link the strange to something familiar, even if it's a total long shot.
And speaking of conflicting information, there was even a disagreement in the comments about Lon Bachelor, the Khan figure, right?
Yeah.
Directly contradicting the original show.
Yes. Someone commented in 2019 claiming Lon Bachelor was actually still alive then, living in Georgia, which completely goes against the unsolved mystery story that he died in 1957.
So who's right?
Well, then another commenter chimed in. They provided birth and death dates for an Alonzo Nathan Lon Bachelor who lived in Georgia and Alabama and did die in 1957. They even found a possible family link to Catherine, the niece from the show.
So like a crowdsourced fact check happening right there in the comments.
Kinda, yeah. People trying to sort out the facts from the fiction, even years later.
And one last comment that really stood out. Someone connected to a later documentary about this exact case.
Right. This was quite powerful. A commenter said their daughter actually played Heidi in a more recent documentary or reenactment.
Oh, wow.
And they shared their own experience during filming, feeling an intense, heavy, dark presence in the actual house. They also mentioned that Heidi's dad, Andy, was still deeply uncomfortable talking about the violent attacks even all those years later.
That adds a whole other layer, doesn't it? A sort of echo of the original fear, experienced by people just retelling the story.
It really does. It suggests the unsettling atmosphere of the case lingered, at least for some involved in revisiting it.
Okay, so pulling it all together, the Heidi Wyrick story out of Ellerslie is just undeniably bizarre and fascinating. The way those initial details about Mr. Gordy and Lon Bachelor were apparently confirmed.
Yeah, the names, the descriptions, Lon's hand.
Through Heidi's descriptions and then the photos, that's incredibly striking. It really gives weight to the idea that something truly unusual was happening.
It's definitely the core strength of the case, those verifiable points about deceased people. But as we've discussed, the shift later on, the appearance of that dark figure, the physical attacks on Heidi and her dad.
Right, the scratches.
That throws a much darker, more disturbing element into the mix. It raises really unsettling questions about what was going on and why it turned violent.
So for everyone listening, you've now got this condensed overview, but hopefully with some real detail, digging into the original story and also how it's been chewed over and debated by others online.
Which brings us, maybe, to a final thought for you to mull over. In this age where we're just swimming in information, and there are so many ways to interpret things, what's your personal benchmark? How do you decide if an extraordinary claim like Heidi's holds water?
That's a great question. Does that initial, really specific, seemingly verifiable stuff about Gordy and Lon, does that carry more weight than the later, scarier, but maybe less verifiable stuff with the dark figure? How do you balance those?
And what do all those comments, the different theories, the personal stories, the contradictions tell us about belief itself? About how we try to make sense of things we can't easily explain. Maybe it's worth revisiting the original sources, or looking into similar cases, keeping these questions about evidence, belief, and interpretation in mind.